Tyler Brooks thought he was here for a routine technology license approval. Nothing complicated, nothing dramatic. Just paperwork. The Galactic High Council had summoned him to their station to review his colony's application for advanced mining equipment. His colony on Epsilon Ridge needed better drills, better processors, better everything really. The equipment they had was 20 years old and breaking down constantly. This approval would change everything for them. The journey to the council station had taken 3 days. Tyler had used the time to memorize every detail of their application, every specification, every projected efficiency gain. He wanted to be prepared for whatever questions they threw at him. This was too important to mess up. When his small transport docked at the massive council station, Tyler had felt his stomach tighten with nerves. The station was enormous, easily 100 times larger than anything humans had built. Ships from dozens of species came and went constantly. The docking bay alone was bigger than his entire colony. A council assistant, some species Tyler didn't recognize with too many arms and crystalline skin, had met him at the dock. No greeting, no small talk. Just a gesture to follow. They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever, past aliens of every imaginable shape and size. Some glanced at Tyler with curiosity. Most ignored him completely. Humans were still new to the galactic community, still outsiders trying to prove they belonged. The assistant led him to a waiting room and left without a word. The room was small but clean, with transparent walls that let Tyler see out into a larger corridor. Sterile. That was the word that kept coming to mind. Everything on this station was sterile, lifeless, efficient. No art on the walls. No plants. No warmth. Just metal and glass and cold, recycled air. Tyler sat down in one of the chairs. It wasn't designed for human bodies and felt uncomfortable, but he dealt with worse. He pulled out his datapad and started reviewing his notes again. The meeting could start any minute, and he wanted to be ready. His colony was counting on him. 50 families, 200 people total, all hoping he could bring back approval for the equipment they desperately needed. What Tyler didn't know, couldn't have known, was that he was already being watched. Behind those transparent walls, behind a layer of one-way glass technology, 47 council members sat in an observation chamber. They were arranged in a semicircle, elevated seats giving them a clear view down into Tyler's waiting room. Each seat had a data coder, a device for recording observations and metrics. Elder Thros sat in the center, highest of all the council members. He was Valerian, one of the oldest species in the council. His face looked carved from stone, all hard angles and no warmth. He'd been on the council for longer than humans had been in space. He'd seen hundreds of species come before the council, seeking approval, seeking acceptance, seeking technology they weren't ready for. He activated his data coder and spoke in a voice that echoed through the observation chamber. This is test subject 204. Human male, age 32, civilian occupation. We will now establish baseline compassion metrics for his species. The other council members prepared their own recording devices. Some leaned forward, interested. Others looked bored, like they'd seen this test too many times to count. Humans have been in council space for 40 years, Elder Thros continued. But we have limited data on their psychological responses to cross-species distress. This assessment will provide crucial information for determining their suitability for advanced technology privileges. A Zenthari council member raised a limb. Elder Thros, preliminary reports suggest humans have unusual empathy responses. Should we adjust the test parameters? No. Standard protocol. We will observe how this human responds to the same variables we've used for 203 previous subjects. Consistency is essential for accurate comparison. In the waiting room below, Tyler was completely unaware of the conversation happening about him. He scrolled through mining equipment specifications, mentally rehearsing his arguments for why his colony needed the upgrades. He was thinking about efficiency ratios and cost projections and safety improvements. He wasn't thinking about tests. He wasn't thinking about being observed. He wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. Elder Thros pressed a button on his console. Begin assessment. Introduce variable 1. A door in Tyler's waiting room slid open. Tyler looked up from his datapad, expecting the council assistant to return, expecting to be called in for his appointment. Instead, a small figure entered the room. A child. Tiny, maybe 3 feet tall, with pale blue skin and large eyes that dominated its face. Valorn, though Tyler didn't know the species name. The child looked around the unfamiliar room with growing panic. Behind the child, a handler, another council assistant, gave the small being a gentle push forward into the room, then immediately retreated and closed the door. The child stood alone in the center of the waiting room. Its large eyes started to fill with tears. Its small body began to tremble. And then it started to cry. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the quiet, scared crying of a child who didn't know where they were or what was happening. Tyler stared. His meeting forgotten, his datapad lowered to his lap. He watched the child for maybe 3 seconds, seeing the fear, hearing the soft sobs. Then he moved. He set his datapad aside and stood up. He crossed the room, his boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. He knelt down, bringing himself to the child's eye level. The child flinched back slightly, afraid of this stranger, this alien human. Tyler didn't reach out aggressively. He didn't grab. He simply opened his arms in invitation, a gesture that transcended language. The child looked at those open arms, at Tyler's calm face, and made a decision. Small feet stumbled forward, and suddenly the child was in Tyler's embrace, small arms wrapping tight around his neck. Tyler held the shaking child and began to hum softly. A tune his mother used to hum when he was young and scared. The child wouldn't understand the melody, but maybe they'd understand the tone. The comfort. The safety. In the observation chamber, 47 council members watched in silence. And the test had truly begun. Tyler had been humming for maybe 2 minutes when the holographic display suddenly materialized in front of him. It appeared without warning, floating in the air at eye level, impossible to ignore. Bright red text flashed against a dark background, each message more urgent than the last. Vehicle impound notice, immediate response required. Tyler's eyes widened slightly. His ship. They were threatening to impound his ship. That was his only way home. His only way back to the colony. Without that ship, he was stranded here, thousands of light years from home. The message vanished, replaced by another. Missed appointment, license application in jeopardy. His stomach dropped. The whole reason he was here. The mining equipment approval that his colony desperately needed. They were saying he'd missed his appointment? But he'd been sitting in this waiting room for 20 minutes, exactly where they'd told him to wait. Another message flashed. Business review initiated, report immediately. Failure to comply will result in permanent license denial. Your colony's application status, critical. The messages kept coming, each one worse than the last. Tyler felt his jaw tighten, his teeth clenching together. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. He'd done everything right. He'd arrived on time, followed every instruction, filled out every form perfectly. How was he suddenly in violation of anything? In the observation chamber above, Elder Thruss watched Tyler's face carefully. Note the stress indicators, he said quietly to the other council members. Increased tension in facial muscles. Visible anxiety response. He understands the consequences. A Hupari council member leaned forward. This is where most species disengage. Self-preservation overrides compassion at this point. They'd run this exact test 203 times before. The pattern was consistent. When test subjects saw their career, their livelihood, their future threatened, they stopped caring about the distressed child. They stood up. They put the child down. They went to deal with their own problems because survival instinct kicked in and compassion took a back seat. It was logical. It was rational. It was what any intelligent species did when forced to choose between helping a stranger and protecting their own interests. Tyler's eyes scanned the messages again. His mind was racing, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Had he misunderstood the appointment time? Had he gone to the wrong waiting room? But no, the council assistant had brought him here specifically. Had told him to wait. The child in his arms shifted slightly, sensing Tyler's tension. The small body had started to relax, the crying had quieted to occasional hiccups, but now the trembling was starting again. The kid could feel Tyler's stress, could sense something was wrong. Tyler looked down at the child. Those large, watery eyes looked back up at him, trusting, vulnerable. The small hands were still gripping Tyler's shirt, holding on like he was the only safe thing in this scary place. He glanced back at the holographic messages. They were still flashing, still demanding immediate response. His ship. His license. His colony's future. Everything he'd come here to accomplish was apparently falling apart while he sat here. But the child was shaking again. Tyler made a decision. He shifted his position, turning his body so that his back was to the holographic display. The movement blocked the bright flashing lights from the child's view. He adjusted the small body in his arms, making sure the kid was comfortable, secure. Then he continued humming, picking up right where he'd left off. The messages kept flashing behind him. He could see the reflection of the red light on the transparent walls, could almost feel the urgency radiating from the display. But he didn't turn around. Didn't stand up. Didn't put the child down to go deal with his problems. In the observation chamber, silence. Complete, total silence. Council members stared at their data corders, then at Tyler, then at each other. "He's ignoring the warnings," a Zen3 council member said, his voice confused. "Perhaps he doesn't understand the severity," another suggested. "No," Elder Thruss replied, studying Tyler's face. "He understands. Look at the stress indicators. He knows exactly what's at stake. He's choosing to ignore it. That's impossible. The threat to his colony alone should override any empathy response. His people depend on this approval. He's jeopardizing everything." But Tyler wasn't moving. He sat there on the uncomfortable floor of the waiting room, back to the flashing warnings, humming softly to a scared alien child who wasn't even his species. Who he'd never met before. Who couldn't give him anything in return. The child's trembling was easing again. The small body was relaxing, pressing closer to Tyler's chest, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of his breathing and the soft vibration of his humming. "Note for the record," Elder Thruss said quietly. "Test subject 204 has not responded to variable 2. Self-interest has not overridden compassion response. Proceeding to variable 3. A Quellan council member named Whitney spoke up. "Elder Thruss, should we consider that the human might be operating under different priority frameworks? Perhaps he's not ignoring the warnings. Perhaps he's assessed the situation and decided the child's well-being is more important." "That would be irrational," Elder Thruss stated flatly. "Or," Whitney said carefully, "it would be compassionate." Elder Thruss didn't respond. He simply pressed another button on his console. In the waiting room, the holographic display changed. The messages grew more urgent, more threatening, more specific. They started listing consequences. Financial penalties. Legal charges. Banishment from council space. Tyler's shoulders tensed. He took a deep breath, let it out slowly. Behind him, the messages continued to flash. He kept humming. Kept holding the child. Kept blocking the lights from the small being's view. And in the observation chamber, 4 to 7 council members watched something they'd never seen before. A being who had everything to lose, choosing to protect someone who had nothing to offer in return. The test was far from over. Tyler had been sitting there for maybe 10 minutes, still humming to the child, still ignoring the flashing warnings behind him, when he heard a door open. Not the door the child had come through, but another one, hidden seamlessly in the wall to his left. He looked up and saw a figure entering the room. The being was tall, easily 7 feet, with skin that looked like polished gray stone. No hair. No softness anywhere. Just hard angles and cold eyes that seemed ancient, like they'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer and been impressed by none of it. The being wore formal robes that marked him as someone important, someone with serious authority. Tyler's arms instinctively tightened around the child. His first thought was protection. This stranger was approaching, and the kid was already scared enough without some intimidating alien bearing down on them. "Captain Brooks," the being said. His voice was deep, formal, with absolutely no warmth in it. The words came out in perfect galactic common, but somehow they still sounded cold, like they'd been refrigerated. "You have been participating in a compassion assessment. The child is not in danger. You may release them now." Tyler stared at him. The words took a moment to process. His brain felt like it was moving through thick fog, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "What?" "This has been a test. You may release the child and stand." The words hung in the air. Tyler looked down at the small being in his arms. The Valorn child was still clinging to his shirt, small fingers gripping the fabric tight enough to wrinkle it. Still trembling, though not as badly as before. The kid's large eyes were watching the tall stranger with obvious fear, pressing closer to Tyler's chest as if trying to hide. "What kind of test?" Tyler's voice came out rougher than he intended. There was an edge to it, something dangerous building underneath. "A compassion assessment," Elder Thruss replied, as if this should be perfectly obvious and reasonable. "A test to determine how your species responds to distress signals from other species. It is part of our evaluation process for granting advanced technology privileges." The words hit Tyler like a punch to the gut. A test. This whole thing was a test. The scared child appearing out of nowhere. The flashing warnings about his ship and his license. The threats to his colony's future. All of it staged. All of it planned. All of it designed specifically to see how he would react when pushed. Tyler felt his face flush hot with anger. You were testing me? His voice came out quiet, but there was something dangerous underneath it now. Anger building like pressure behind a dam. Using a scared child as a prop. He looked down at the kid in his arms again. The small being looked so real, so genuinely frightened. The way it had clung to him, the desperate sound of its crying, the trembling that had slowly eased as it felt safe. All of that was part of a test? How long? Tyler demanded, looking back up at Elder Thross. How long have you been watching me? Since you entered this room. The observation began the moment you sat down. Tyler's eyes swept the transparent walls with new understanding. Not just walls. Observation glass. One-way viewing. He'd been in a cage this whole time, being watched, being studied like an animal in a lab. Who else is watching? The full council. 4 to 7 members in total. 4 to 7 people. Tyler's voice was getting louder now, his control slipping. 4 to 7 people watched me hold a scared child and didn't say a word. Didn't stop the test. Just sat there and watched like I was some kind of entertainment. This is not entertainment, Captain Brooks. This is evaluation. We must understand the psychological frameworks of species before granting them access to advanced technology. By traumatizing them? By making them think their entire mission is falling apart while they're trying to help someone. Tyler stood up carefully, still holding the child who whimpered at the movement. Those warnings were fake too, weren't they? My ship isn't being impounded. I didn't miss my appointment. You just wanted to see if I'd abandon this kid to save myself. Correct. We needed to establish whether human compassion persists when faced with personal consequences. Needed to establish. Tyler repeated the words slowly, tasting how clinical they sounded. How cold. You talk about this child like they're a data point. Like their fear doesn't matter because it serves your research. The child's emotional state is part of the test parameters, yes. Tyler looked down at the small being in his arms. The kid was watching him with those large, trusting eyes. Still scared, but finding comfort in Tyler's presence. Or at least, appearing to. How much of this was real? Was any of it real? What happens to the child now? Tyler asked. After you're done using them for your test. The child will be returned to its guardian and compensated appropriately. Compensated? Tyler shook his head in disbelief. You think you can compensate a kid for scaring them half to death? For teaching them that strangers will use their fear as a tool? Captain Brooks, you seem to be under a misapprehension about the nature of. No, Tyler cut him off. I understand perfectly. You run tests. You evaluate species. You decide who's worthy of your technology and your approval. And apparently, part of that process involves traumatizing children and watching to see who actually gives a damn. Elder Thruss remained unmoved, his expression carved from stone. Your emotional response is noted. However, I must inform you. Let me guess, Tyler interrupted again. I failed. Right? Because I didn't calculate the cost-benefit analysis of comforting a scared child? Because I didn't prioritize my own interests over someone else's distress. The assessment results are more complex than simple pass or fail metrics. But that's what it comes down to, isn't it? Tyler's voice was shaking now with barely controlled anger. You wanted to see if I'd walk away. If I'd put this kid down and go deal with my own problems when things got inconvenient. And when I didn't, when I actually tried to help, that made me fail your test. Elder Thruss was silent for a long moment. Then he said, almost gently, Captain Brooks, there is something you should know about the child you're holding. And that's when everything changed. The council convened in their main deliberation chamber 2 hours after Tyler had left the station. The room was circular, massive, with each council member seat elevated at different heights based on their species seniority in the galactic community. Holographic displays floated in the center, showing data streams and analysis from Tyler's assessment. Elder Thruss stood at the highest point, his stone-like face illuminated by the blue glow of the data screens. Around him, 4 to 6 other council members waited in silence. This was always the part that mattered most. The evaluation. The decision. Test subject 204, human male, Tyler Brooks. Elder Thruss began, his voice echoing through the chamber. Assessment complete. Data analysis compiled. Let us review. The holographic display shifted, showing video footage of Tyler in the waiting room. They watched him set down his datapad the moment the synthetic child entered. Watched him cross the room in less than 5 seconds. Watched him kneel and open his arms without hesitation. Response time, 4.3 seconds from visual contact to physical comfort initiation, a Zen3 Council member read from the data. That's the fastest response we've recorded in 204 assessments. Note also the lack of assessment period, another added. He didn't attempt to locate a guardian. Didn't verify the situation. Didn't calculate risk. Just responded. The displays shifted again, showing Tyler's face when the warning messages appeared. The tension in his jaw. The stress in his eyes. The way he'd glanced at the threats to his ship, his license, his colony's future. Subject clearly understood the personal consequences, a Hupari Council member observed. His physiological responses indicate high stress levels. Elevated heart rate. Increased cortisol production. He knew what was at stake. And yet he didn't disengage, Elder Thruss said. When 89% of previous subjects disengaged at this point, he turned his back to the warnings and continued providing comfort. The video showed Tyler shifting his position to block the flashing lights from the child's view. Showed him humming, rocking gently, completely focused on the small being in his arms while his entire mission crumbled behind him. Irrational behavior, a Crothian Council member declared. He prioritized a stranger's emotional state over his own survival interests. Over his colony's needs. Over rational self-preservation. Exactly, Elder Thruss agreed. Which brings us to the conclusion. By every metric we use to evaluate species for advanced technology privileges, this human has failed. Spectacularly. The data displays changed again, showing comparative analysis. Charts and graphs that measured Tyler's responses against 203 previous test subjects from dozens of different species. In every category that the Council valued, rational decision-making, priority assessment, protocol adherence, self-interest preservation, Tyler scored at the bottom. Conclusion is clear, Elder Thruss announced, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. Humanity demonstrates excessive emotional investment at the cost of rational decision-making. They are unsuitable for advanced technology privileges. Several Council members nodded in agreement. The evidence was right there in the data. The human had ignored urgent warnings. Had violated social protocols by refusing to acknowledge authority. Had ultimately challenged the Council itself when confronted about his behavior. Granting his species access to advanced technology would be irresponsible at best, dangerous at worst. All in favor of denying the human colony's technology application. Hands, claws, and various appendages began to rise throughout the chamber. The vote was looking like it would be overwhelming. Another species evaluated and found wanting. Another application denied. Just another day in the Galactic Council's work of maintaining order and rationality across the stars. But then a voice spoke up from the lower tiers. I object. The chamber fell silent. Objections during final votes were rare. Very rare. All eyes turned to find the speaker. It was Whitney, a Quellan Council member. She was young by Council standards, only 40 years in her position. Her species was small, barely 4 feet tall, with soft gray fur and large eyes that gave her a deceptively gentle appearance. But her voice was steady as she stood. Elder Thruss, I request permission to present additional data before the final vote. Elder Thruss looked down at her with those cold, ancient eyes. The assessment is complete, Council Member Whitney. The data has been reviewed. What additional information could possibly be relevant? Historical context, Whitney replied. She activated her own datapad, and new information began populating the holographic displays. I've been reviewing humanity's file since their first contact with Council Space 40 years ago. I found patterns that I believe are directly relevant to this decision. Patterns? Elder Thruss's tone suggested he was humouring her but wasn't actually interested. Yes. Whitney's displays showed incident reports. Hundreds of them. In the 40 years since humans entered Council space, their vessels have responded to 847 distress calls. Distress calls from other species. From strangers. From beings they'd never met and would likely never see again. A murmur rippled through the Council chamber. 847 was a staggering number. For comparison, Whitney continued, the Zen3, our second highest responder species, has answered 23 distress calls in the same time period. The Crothians, 16. The Valorians, 11. My own species, the Quellan, only 7. The displays shifted, showing detailed logs. Human ships diverting from profitable routes to rescue stranded vessels. Human medics treating injured beings from hostile species. Human engineers rebuilding infrastructure on planets they had no economic interest in. But here's what's truly remarkable, Whitney said, her voice growing stronger. The human response rate isn't random. It's not selective. It's 100%. Every single distress call received by a human vessel in 40 years has been answered. Every single one. The chamber was completely silent now. This isn't a flaw in one human's judgment, Whitney said, looking up at Elder Thross. This is systematic behavior across their entire species. They don't help because it benefits them. They help because they can't do otherwise. Elder Thross's expression hardened. This emotionality is precisely why they're dangerous. But Whitney wasn't done. Or perhaps we need to reconsider what we define as dangerous. Tyler received the official notification 2 days later. He was back on his small transport ship, halfway between the council station and home, when the message came through. The screen lit up with the council's official seal, and Tyler's stomach dropped before he even opened it. Application denied. The words were right there at the top, bold and final. Reason: emotional instability inconsistent with responsible resource management. Below that was a bunch of legal language that basically said his colony's request for advanced mining equipment had been rejected. No appeal process. No second chance. Just denied. Tyler read the message 3 times, each time hoping he'd misunderstood something. But the words didn't change. His colony would have to continue using outdated equipment that broke down every other week. Their expansion plans, the new housing they desperately needed, the medical facility they'd been hoping to build, all of it would be delayed by years. Maybe decades. He sat there in the pilot's chair, staring at the screen until the words started to blur. Then he deleted the message and set course for home. The 3-day journey back to Epsilon Ridge felt longer than the trip out. Tyler kept playing the whole thing over in his mind. The synthetic child. The test. Elder Thross's cold eyes. Part of him wondered if he should have done things differently. Should have put the kid down when the warnings appeared. Should have prioritized his mission over a stranger's fear. But every time he thought about it, he came back to the same conclusion. He couldn't have done it differently. Wouldn't have, even knowing the outcome. Because some things mattered more than equipment licenses. Some things mattered more than efficiency and rational decision-making and all the other things the council valued. When Tyler landed back at the colony, 50 families were waiting at the docking bay. Hopeful faces. Expectant eyes. They'd been counting on him. The whole colony had been talking about nothing else for weeks. The new equipment. The expansion. The better future that was coming. Tyler had to tell them it wasn't coming. Not now. Maybe not ever. He explained what happened, leaving out the details about the test. Just said the council had denied their application. The disappointment on their faces was worse than any angry words could have been. But nobody blamed him. Nobody got angry. They just nodded and went back to work, making do with what they had. That was the hardest part. The forgiveness. Tyler almost wished someone would yell at him, tell him he'd screwed up. At least then he could argue back. But they just accepted it and moved on. 6 months passed. Tyler threw himself into his work, trying to keep the colony running with equipment that should have been retired a decade ago. The main drill broke down twice in 1 week. They lost 3 days of work jury-rigging a fix with spare parts that weren't quite right. The ore processor kept overheating, forcing them to run it at half capacity. Everything took longer, cost more, produced less. But they adapted. Humans were good at that. They'd been adapting to difficult situations since before they'd even left Earth. This was just one more challenge to overcome. Tyler was in the maintenance bay, elbow deep in a malfunctioning hydraulic system, when his comm unit beeped with an incoming message. He almost ignored it. Probably just another status report or equipment failure notification. But something made him check. The sender name made him stop cold. Whitney. The Quellan Council member who'd been present at his assessment. Tyler hadn't expected to hear from anyone on the council ever again, let alone someone reaching out directly. He cleaned the grease off his hands and opened the message. It was brief, just one line. Captain Brooks, I have a proposal I believe would interest you. Tyler stared at the message for a long moment. Part of him wanted to delete it immediately. He was done with the council, done with their tests and their cold logic and their judgments. But curiosity got the better of him. What kind of proposal would a council member have for someone they deemed emotionally unstable? He sent back a reply. I'm listening. The response came within an hour. Not a text message this time, but a request for a real-time communication link. Tyler accepted, and Whitney's face appeared on his screen. She looked different than he remembered from the observation chamber. Smaller, somehow. Less intimidating. Her large eyes held something that looked almost like nervousness. Captain Brooks, thank you for responding. I wasn't sure if you would. I almost didn't, Tyler admitted. What's this about? Whitney took a breath. 3 months ago, I left the Galactic Council. Tyler's eyebrows shot up. You left? Why? Because of you, actually. Because of what happened during your assessment. She shifted, looking uncomfortable. I've been a council member for 40 years. I thought I understood how the galaxy worked. Thought the council's methods were the right way to maintain order and prosperity. But watching you hold that synthetic child while your entire future fell apart, it made me question everything. Tyler didn't know what to say to that. Whitney continued, her words coming faster now. I started digging into humanity's history with Council Space. The distress calls, the rescue missions, the way humans consistently choose compassion over profit. And I realized we'd built a civilization that punishes the very thing that makes life worth living. Okay, Tyler said slowly. But what does this have to do with me? Whitney smiled for the first time. I'm forming something new. We're calling it the Compassion Coalition. Species who are tired of the Council's cold logic and want to try a different approach. We have 12 member species so far. Small, but growing. And you need what from me? Everything. Engineers, medics, teachers, people who can help us rebuild our systems around compassion instead of efficiency. People who understand that helping others isn't a weakness. Tyler thought about his colony. About the struggling equipment and the delayed expansion plans. About 50 families making do with less because he'd held a scared child when logic said he should have walked away. What's in it for us? He asked. Fair trade. Mutual support. And access to coalition technology without having to pass tests designed to measure how well you can ignore suffering. Whitney leaned forward. I can't promise it'll be easy. The Council still controls most of the galaxy. But we're building something different. Something better. And we need humans to show us how. Tyler looked around his maintenance bay. At the broken equipment and the patch jobs and the constant struggle. Then he thought about that synthetic child. About the choice he'd made and would make again. Let me talk to my people, Tyler said finally. But I think we'd be interested. The Compassion Coalition changed everything slowly but surely, one choice at a time, one species at a time, proving that maybe compassion wasn't a flaw after all.